JD, welcome to my channel. Please like and subscribe, please, I beg of you. So this is some work today on a platform balance staff. I'm going to strip that balance down to nothing to get access to the balance staff, because I'm going to have to make a brand new balance staff. So here I've got the balance complete with the hairspring and the roller table in the bottom, and I need to remove both the hairspring and the roller table to get access to the balance itself. And then following that, I'll show you how to measure this. If you look at that, you can see the pivot on the right hand side is gone, which is kind of normal for a damage that you would have of a clock or something. The lower pivot probably takes more shock, but anyway, it's gone, and the whole balance staff therefore needs to be replaced. So what I'm doing here is putting the balance complete into a bench block I have, so it's safe and ready for removal of the hairspring. Alright, now we're just making sure that that balance is in a good position. So I position the arms so they're parallel to my eyeballs, so when I remove that hairspring, putting a little black dot here so I know where the stud is, so when I put the hairspring back on the watch, I've got the stud aligned properly, and that's usually the opposite side to where the impulse jewel is. So when you're removing a hairspring on a pocket watch or a watch of this type, you can take some very small screwdrivers and you put them underneath the or above the arms, but you go low first to make sure they're underneath the hairspring so they don't interfere with the hairspring. So you can see me getting in there underneath the hairspring, and always put downward pressure on there, so if something slips, it goes down, it doesn't go up into the hairspring. And so here I'm just rotating these screwdrivers in the opposite direction. This collet was a little bit hard to get off, because it may have never been removed in its whole life. So, and again, I don't know how old this particular carriage clock is, but it's likely somewhere between 150 and 200 years old. I'll have to get an expert. It's from England, so I'd have to go to Antique Roadshow and get those guys to have a look at it to see whether it's old or not, or how old it is. So when I'm putting the screwdrivers on here, I got to readjust the balance occasionally so that the arms are kind of parallel to the screwdrivers as I'm working it. Here I managed to get one out and the other one didn't want to come out, but I'm rotating the whole balance around here. Because one screwdriver was able to get tucked in. The larger one I need to put on the smaller side to actually work that one up. And so it's just a little bit of patience here in doing this. You do not want to damage the hairspring as it attaches to the collet. That's where you're trying to avoid touching the hairspring at all. So in this case, I'm not touching it one bit, and the hairspring is very gently lifted up, and you're good. There it is. And so we're going to have a look at this hairspring. It's actually in really good condition. It likely has to be demagnetized. It's a very old watch, so I'm sure there's plenty of magnetism in there which would affect the performance of the watch. And here I've got the balance again, and it's actually in pretty good condition. You notice there's no balance screws on this balance. So these old carriage clock balances did and didn't have screws. Some of them did, some of them didn't. So the older ones did not have screws to actually level the balance off, like you do with your set of tires at home with weights, same sort of thing. So it's poising the balance, so you're poising it by taking material off that rim. So you're drilling material off by poising it. So now I've got this little nifty device that's really good for knocking off the roller table. So I've got a large and small for pocket watches and platform balances like this. It usually takes the large one, and it secures the wider part of that roller table in place. The jewel's on top there, so I just have to pick a stake that goes over the top. So I'm just trying the smaller one to see if that fits at all, and nope, doesn't fit. Go back, measure twice, cut once, kind of thing. So got to pick the right stake to go over that pivot. Now here the pivot is broken, so I'm not as concerned about the safety of the pivot. If I were repivoting this, I might be a little more concerned, but I'm likely just going to build a new balance. I might repivot it. It's hard to say. I'm going to have to look at the balance staff and make sure I've pick the right technique. And here I've got some Rodico, and what I'm doing here is I'm flattening out the piece of Rodico, and I'm going to put that flat piece of Rodico underneath that balance, and that's to protect that lower pivot and make sure it doesn't get damaged. I took a look at the lower pivot, and it's in okay condition, I'll say. So maybe not great condition, but okay condition. So had I decided up front to repivot this one, then I likely would have just left the balance and everything on to do the repivot. Of course, it's a lot easier to do when you take off the roller table and you clean up the balance. You got to take the hairspring off anyway, so I figured I might as well punch the whole lot out. And I think making a new balance staff for this is the best move. Might be just as difficult to repivot this, because I don't think that the existing pivot, it's okay, but I don't think it's in superb condition. So I can probably build a new balance staff for this, and well, it's about time I've built some balance staffs again. So I need to get some training here, so I'm going to use this opportunity to actually hone my skills in building a balance staff. And you notice that there's a roller table. It's got a mini roller and the safety roller on the top, a little small one, and a large one. So there's the balance. And that little one is attached. It's one piece, so it's one piece of metal, the larger roller table, and then the tube leading to the smaller safety roller. So it's prevent the knocking of. It actually prevents the balance from swinging beyond where it should go. So it's a safety roller for the impulse jewel. When the pallet fork swings through, it can only swing through when it's in that position. So the safety roller and the dart that's on the balance or the pallet fork prevent that pallet fork from, I'll call it overbanking, but from being out of alignment, which is probably the proper term to use. So these little jobby doohickeys, I can never remember the name of these things, are really handy. And what they're used for is to press that balance with the balance staff against the staking table, so that there's pressure, downward pressure on the arms, so that when you're punching this out, it doesn't warp the arms of the balance. So you'll see that I'm sizing this, and it's got to be absolutely the right size. That hole is actually too small, because you want the arms to be absolutely flat on the roller table. So I'm just eyeballing where it's sitting right now, but I want to make sure that I've got the right hole. So I get a centering stake and just kind of measure where I put the balance, tighten it up just a bit, and then take the balance out and take that centering stake and then center the roller table, or center the staking set table here. There we go. So that's nice and centered. Tighten that up. And now that I've got it tightened up, I know that I can put the balance in there, and then I can put the thingamajobby doohickey jig in there that's going to help me punch that balance out without damaging the arms. So always check and make sure you get the right side of this thing. So the good news is the pivot on the end is already broken, so I'm not too worried about when I punch it out about damaging that. But sometimes the other pivot will be the one that's broken and the upper one is fine, so you really have to be careful when you use this tool punching out the balance, that the actual punch goes over the pivot and then hits the actual rim right after the pivot as it tapers upward. So the pivot typically, the balance staff will taper down into the pivot, so you got to make sure that you're using that taper point as the point where that stake is going to touch. So here I'm trying to show how that's aligned. I had to use a smaller punch. I tried the larger one, but it didn't want to fit through there for some reason. So when in doubt, change it out. Yeah, and watchmaking, nothing works the first time. So here I've got the smaller punch in there, or stake in there, and it's over the top of what would have been the pivot. So that's over the top. I'm just showing, there it is, and it goes right over the top. In this case, actually, I made a boo-boo here. In this case, it actually is going over the good pivot, so I had to be careful there that I wasn't going to damage it. And you saw me remove the roller table earlier, and I was able to pound down on the bad pivot side, which is good, right? So I wasn't too worried about breaking that, but I had the Rodico on the other side to protect the good pivot when the balance staff actually falls down or falls through. So here I'm tightening this up nicely, so it's tight. So you get it kind of all set up first, then you tighten it, and you give it a good tightening. That arm is there to actually allow you to tighten it even more after you've tightened it enough. Tighten it again, and now it's really in there really good. So now when I tap on this with my hammer, I use the brass side of my hammer because there's a nylon side of the hammer as well. I just tap hard on that, and that's going to punch that out, and it'll fall through the hole, fall down below, and the balance staff will be down by where my hand is on the bottom. And so once I've got that done, I can just disassemble the whole rig here and put everything away. And there's the balance staff, nicely removed, and the existing pivot is good there. So if I really wanted to repivot this thing, if a keener, I could try to repivot. I could do that, and then if it's not repivotable, is that a word? Repivotable, then I can make a brand new balance staff. So I don't mind trying to repivot that. It's kind of fun, and I know I can't ruin it, because if I do, I just make another balance staff. So that's a possibility here, is to try to repivot that. It's a little easier, I think, than making a balance staff. So that's that, and then I just put the old balance, the old hairspring in there. Grab that by the stud very carefully, and then the roller table goes in next to it with its impulse jewel. I'll have the opportunity to wash that off again, and this is for Paul, and so I just move that aside so I can get to the next job. The next job is critical. So if you're going to procure a balance staff, and you're going to go to, say, Dave's Watch Parts, which is a great supplier, by the way, so kudos out to Dave. He's going to need to know all the measurements of this balance staff. So what I did here is there's extra measurements that he would need to know that I don't have here, but these are the measurements that I need to know to cut a new balance staff. So what I'm doing here is I'm just drawing out the balance staff. There's the rim where the balance would go, the one I'm drawing right now. The previous rim is where the roller table would fit on. And then there's a rim for the hairspring and the diameter of that on the balance staff, and then it goes down from the hairspring down to where the pivot is. And so I'm having a look at the design of this balance staff to make sure that what I'm drawing is accurate, because I'd like to replicate exactly what this balance staff is doing. So it had another sub ring here, and you don't need to have it that small. You could have it the same width as the previous one, but what the heck. So it might need to be that small just to fit inside where the jewel setting is. So the jewel setting may be what's governing that secondary rim. So here I'm just looking at the other side where the roller table is, and there's nothing fancy on that side. There's just a shaft all the way down to where the pivot tapers down, and then the pivot's on the end. So here I'm getting ready to do all the measurements. So all I do is just draw a line up from where that is, and these are all diameter measurements for now, with the exception of the bottom one that I showed you, which would be the measurement of the complete length of that balance staff. And later on, I actually do some sub measurements, but the rest of it you're actually cutting and measuring it as you're cutting the staff. So you really don't need to do the measurements as you're cutting, because you're just taking the existing staff and using that as your sample to actually cut the new staff. So you're always, and then you're fitting, you're cutting and fitting and cutting and fitting as you build a balance staff. I do have other videos on how to build a balance staff. So here I've got a very good micrometer. I lost the back cap for that, and it's on the floor somewhere. I know I have it on the floor somewhere, but I have to go down on my hands and knees and look for it. And my wife's likely going to come in and say, "Why are you down on your hands and knees again? Did you lose your wedding ring or something?" No, dear, it's not that. I'm looking for a part. It's non-magnetic, so I can't get my giant magnet, the one from GetSmart that pulled the ship towards the island. And if you're old enough, you remember that. So there we go. So I got the micrometer all set up. That little green vise I have is really good. I picked that up at Cordon Tools, Cordon Tools up here in Canada. Go to the web. I've said it before. Look them up. They're an amazing tool store. They have vintage tools in there, and they have new tools, and they have stock material, all kinds of cool stuff. You can go there and basically hang out there for a day. It's like going to Canada's Wonderland or Disneyland. For a guy, you go there and you do that. So here I'm measuring the widths here with my micrometer, and it goes down to 3 decimal places in millimeters, which is really nice. In some instances like this, I put 0.836. I could probably put 0.84 because really I'm just removing material and then doing the fit as I'm graving material away and then fitting and then graving and fitting. So, but in general, I just want to know what that diameter is so I can cut a lot of material away fast. And here's the widest part of the balance staff, and this allows me to say, okay, what stock material do I need? What stock rod of blued steel do I need? So I could probably use a piece of blued steel. As you can see here, this is 2 point something, right? So let me look at what I'm writing here, 2.28. So if I were to get some blued steel that was 2.5 in diameter, that would be fine, and I could cut that down. So this rim is not super important anyway. You got to get it close, but this one, that rim is not technically going to cause your watch to not work properly. It's just a fat rim that rests against the arms of the balance. So you notice every time I do a measurement, I take my micrometer, I close it down again, I zero it again. So this is to make sure that I absolutely have the right measurement each time. If you get in the habit of doing that, your measurements will always be accurate. So I know this is likely painful for you guys to watch, but that's why there's a fast forward on YouTube. So here I'm measuring the rim where the balance actually sits. This is tricky because when you cut this away, you have to leave enough metal, as you can see where I'm measuring it. You got to leave enough metal to create the rivet. And this was riveted on, not friction fit. I looked at that before and I noticed it's a rivet that's made, so you have to leave enough material actually to create the rivet to rivet the balance on. So even if you buy a new balance, the new balance will have a little extra material on there to allow you to rivet the balance in place. So sometimes I've purchased balance staffs that were kind of loose, meaning the hole in the balance was bigger than the diameter of that part, and I had to do a lot of riveting to get that thing solid. So normally they're close to being tight, but so here's the rim where the hairspring goes. So, and these rims here, the diameter of this particular part is tapered. So there's a degree of taper in there, and when you're cutting that, cutting the balance, you're fitting it, and you're trying to fit it as close to its end position as possible, because when you're putting the hairspring on with the collet and you're staking that on, if the rim is tapered and it's too fat, then you're going to split that collet when you actually tap it in. If the taper is not enough, then when you put the collet in, it's going to be loose, and then you can try to close the collet. I have tools that allow me to squeeze that collet to close it, but if you look at that little arm there and you do 50%, say, so you get the collet down halfway, then that's probably likely good enough. If you've got like maybe a 1 degree taper on that, or 0.5 degree taper probably is more accurate. So here I'm resetting it again just like I did before, and here I'm measuring that last little rim that's before you get to the pivot. I think that's what I'm measuring, or am I not? Let me see. No, actually I'm measuring the complete length of that balance, so the balance staff. So here what you need to do is you measure you measure it and you eyeball what the pivot would be, the pivot size would be. And later on I actually measure the pivot itself, so I can do some math and just subtract what I think that pivot size, or add the pivot size itself to the absolute distance from one side to the other side of this balance. So I'll just make sure that's completely accurate. I think Sonny out there who watches my videos gave me a good idea for actually measuring the distance between the bottom jewel and the upper jewel. Maybe you open it up and you find a fine wire to put between them, and be able to ride that wire down and measure what the distance of the length of that wire is. So that's not a bad idea. I haven't tried that yet, but I'd have to have the world's smallest wire to do that probably. Or I take the jewel out on both sides, or on the top anyway, and then push the wire down to measure it. But I've made a few balance staffs in my career here as a watchmaker, and every one of them I've got running, so I'm not really afraid of this. It's just a little bit of work, and the finalizing the pivots is the hardest part. So here I finished that length of 7.45, which is from end to end, and I'm estimating the actual end. So if I were to order a balance staff, I'd have to know the lengths of each one of those subsections of this balance staff, so that the actual part supplier would know that they've got the right balance staff. So now I'm just squeezing this thing down again, and I'm likely going to zero it again, even though it's zeroed. I press the 0 button again, just in case. Yeah, and then I want to widen this again, because I'm going to measure this length again. So this is measured twice, cut once. So I put that in again, and then squeeze it down and measure it. So bear with me. This is exciting stuff, I'm sure. You guys are so excited about this. Measure this, and then I'm able to get another measurement, and this is the absolute measurement of this. And then I've got two measurements, and I know it's somewhere between one and the other, and see I'm shaking that balance back and forth, and I'm eyeballing the actual pivot length in this case. So now that I've got that done, I'm going to put another measurement down below that first measurement, and it's 7.56, so it's somewhere between 7.45 and 7.56, and it's just around, so that's my estimating symbol there for math. So now I've thought, okay, I've got that now. I've measured it a few times. Let's measure the absolute length again. So I want to know exactly how long this is without the pivot. And there we go. And usually things drop, and then luckily Rodico is able to be used to pick it up again. And then I have to form the darn thing on there so it doesn't drop again. Push it on, and then get it ready again. So this vise is very good. So it was a godsend for me. It's fast to squeeze something on there. So I got 7.059 is the absolute measurement of this thing. So I want to make sure I'm completely accurate, and I put that down in my docs. 7.058. Ooh, it changed. So there it is, resting nicely between the jaws of my micrometer. 7.05. Do I put 8 or do I put 9? I think I put 8. 0.058. There we go. And that is from the back end where the pivot is, right, to the end where the pivot is broken. As you can see, those two reference lines are offset slightly to show the length of the pivot. So I could do some math there if I subtract 7.45 from 7.058, and that would be my pivot length. So here I'm just eyeballing what I think the pivot length is. So I'm getting up very close here, and I'm just looking at that pivot length between the jaws of the micrometer, and you can be pretty accurate doing this. And so I want to make sure I leave enough pivot on the end, because you can't lengthen it. So when you're making a balance staff, if you make that pivot a little longer on both sides, you're better off, because you can always trim it down to make sure everything fits. And you would trim that pivot down before you put the balance on. I've used a piece of paper in the past to do that and pretend the piece of paper is the balance to spin it properly. So here I've got my Seats jeweling tool, and it's for measuring the pivot size. So I kind of eyeball this thing, and I know it's not a wristwatch, so I know it's not like 0.9. So I figured it's probably around 0.17. And so it's not a really small pivot, which is nice, right? Because usually I do pivots that are 0.11. So this is large, 0.17. So that one fit perfectly down, but you go down a little smaller to see if it's even better. So when I put this one in, it actually stood up nicely, and I looked at the pivot stopped just by the time it hit the taper part. It stopped. So I'm looking at that pivot thinking, okay, that's probably the right size for the actual pivot that would go into the jewel, because the taper part wouldn't go into the jewel. And here's a nice shot of that. So it's, I believe, 0.16 is what I'm going to use here for the size of that pivot. So that you do need to know as you're cutting it, because you're going to be measuring that as you're finalizing the pivot on the balance staff. So 0.16 is what I need, and I just put width, W-I-D-T-H. I just put wide because I probably can't spell width. So it's that wide, and then I put the jewel hole, I think I put, or something, jewel size. I can't remember what I wrote. It was like 5-10 minutes ago. So there we go, jewel hole. So there we go, there are the measurements. Now if I were to procure a balance staff, then I would also measure the lengths as I'm showing you here. I would measure those lengths as well, and send the supply house those lengths so they could take what they think the right balance staff is and give me the right one. So I learned that one the hard way. So there we go. That's all the measurements you'd ever need. And this one here I put is for the hairspring, and I was absolutely wrong. So I said, okay, listen, you doughhead, that is not for the hairspring. That is for the, wait for it, roller table. So there we go. So thanks for watching my video. Please subscribe to my channel, and please like and comment. I love the comments. If you got time to comment on this, I'd appreciate that. And take care. Have a good day.